Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, 1882. The steam locomotive belched smoke and cinders into the darkening sky as it crawled to a halt at the weathered station platform. Keegan Calloway tightened his grip on the reins of his restless quarter horse, watching as the iron beast hissed to a stop. At 25, he'd lived by one principle that had kept him alive across the untamed territory: trust no one but yourself. The frontier was no place for connection, only survival. His parents' brutal deaths at the hands of raiders when he was 16 had cemented that belief. Now, all he wanted was to build his small ranch into something substantial, something that could withstand the harsh Wyoming winters and the even harsher realities of frontier life. Connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got you killed out west. The last golden rays of sunlight cast long shadows across the platform as passengers disembarked. Keegan only came to town for supplies and to collect mail for neighboring homesteaders, a favor that earned him goodwill he might need someday. No other reason to linger in Cheyenne when his cabin and 100 acres were calling him home. "Last train for 2 weeks, folks," the station master called. "Weather's turning bad up north, lines might be down for a spell." Keegan collected the expected parcels from the mail car, nodding his thanks to the clerk, when movement on a bench at the far end of the platform caught his eye. A young woman sat slumped against the wall of the station, her chin dropped to her chest in exhausted sleep. Her blue traveling dress, though quality fabric, was wrinkled from long journey. Golden blonde hair escaped from what had once been a tidy arrangement, now falling in soft waves around her face. A small valise and a battered trunk sat at her feet. Something about her vulnerability in such a public place made Keegan uneasy. Cheyenne after dark was no place for a woman alone, especially one as striking as her. He glanced around, noting several rough-looking men eyeing her from the shadows near the saloon across the street. He tied his parcels to his saddle and approached cautiously. "Miss," he said quietly, then, louder when she didn't stir, "Miss. You shouldn't be sleeping here." Her eyes fluttered open, startlingly blue, and confusion crossed her face before alarm replaced it. She straightened immediately, hand clutching at a small reticule in her lap. "I'm sorry to wake you," Keegan said, taking a step back to appear less threatening. "But the station's closing soon, and Cheyenne isn't safe after dark for a woman alone." "I'm waiting for someone," she said, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "My uncle, he was supposed to meet the train." Keegan recognized the look of someone stranded. He'd seen it often enough in this territory where plans rarely survived contact with reality. "Which uncle would that be, miss?" he asked gently. "James Gardner, he has a ranch north of here." Her voice wavered slightly. Keegan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "James Gardner passed away 3 months ago, miss. Pneumonia took him quick." The color drained from her face. "That's not possible. I received his letter inviting me to come just 6 weeks ago." "Mail's slow out here," Keegan said. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you." She sat perfectly still, absorbing the news. "I see," her composure impressed him. No hysterics, just a quiet dignity as she processed her new reality. "Then I shall need to find lodging until I can make new arrangements." Keegan knew there wasn't a respectable boarding house in Cheyenne that would take in a woman arriving alone after dark, without references or a family connection. The hotels that would accept her were not places a decent woman should go. "I knew James," Keegan said, making a decision that surprised himself. "My ranch borders what was his property. I could." He hesitated, aware of how improper his next words would sound. "I have a cabin. It's small but solid. You could stay there tonight, and tomorrow we can figure out your options." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion, exactly as they should. "Why would I trust you, sir? I don't even know your name." "Keegan Calloway. I've got my own place about 12 miles north, and you shouldn't trust me, that's wise. But those men across the street have been watching you since the train arrived, and they're not considering offering you proper lodging." She glanced in the direction he indicated, her face paling further when she saw the rough men lingering in the shadows. "I'm Delaney Gardner," she said finally. "James was my father's brother. I'm 20 years old, and I came west because there's nothing left for me in Boston." She lifted her chin slightly. "My reputation is all I have, Mr. Calloway." "I understand, Miss Gardner. I'd offer to take you to the sheriff's wife, but they live above the jail and there's no room. Pastor Williams might help, but his house is full with his 6 children." Keegan weighed his options. There's a widow, Mrs. Parsons, about 5 miles out. We could see if she'd take you in. Delaney glanced at the darkening sky. And if she won't? Then you take my cabin and I'll sleep in the stable with my horses, he said simply. She studied him for a long moment. Why would you help me? Because your uncle was a good man who helped me when I was starting out, Keegan said honestly. And because my mother raised me better than to leave a woman alone at a train station at night. Something in his words must have reached her, because she nodded once, decisively. Very well, Mr. Calloway, I accept your help, though I insist you take me to this Mrs. Parsons first. Of course, he agreed, relieved she had the sense to be cautious. Let me help with your trunk. As Keegan loaded her belongings onto his horse, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed solitude was about to be disrupted. This woman with her proper Eastern ways and golden hair had no place in his life of hard work and deliberate isolation. Yet as he helped her mount behind him, her hands hesitantly settling at his waist, he felt something shift inside him, an awareness he couldn't quite name and didn't particularly welcome. Hold tight, he said, urging his horse forward. It's rough country ahead. The journey to Mrs. Parsons' modest homestead was silent, broken only by the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional startled breath from Delaney as the horse navigated the uneven terrain. The older woman's face showed surprise when she opened her door to find Keegan with a beautiful young woman, but her expression quickly hardened after hearing the situation. I'm sorry, dear, Mrs. Parsons said, her tone genuinely regretful. I've got my son and his family staying with me. Diphtheria took their little ones and they're selling their place, not a corner to spare. Delaney nodded politely, but Keegan could feel the tension in her body as they rode away. So it's your cabin then, she said quietly. I want to be clear, Mr. Calloway. I may be desperate, but I'm not without principles. As am I, Keegan responded. You'll have the cabin to yourself. I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count. The moon had risen by the time they reached his property. His cabin was small but well built, with a stone chimney and a front porch where he sometimes sat to watch the sunset. A barn stood nearby, and beyond that, a corral where 3 other horses grazed. It wasn't much, but it was his, built with his own hands on land he'd earned through years of hard work. It's not what you're used to, Keegan said as he helped her down from the horse, but it's dry and warm. Delaney stood for a moment, taking in the cabin silhouetted against the night sky. It's more than I have at the moment, Mr. Calloway. I'm grateful. Inside, Keegan quickly lit a lamp and stirred the banked coals in the fireplace, adding kindling until flames flickered to life. The cabin was a single room with a bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a cooking area. Simple, functional, and utterly lacking in privacy. Delaney stood just inside the doorway, clutching her reticule, her face a careful mask. I'll get your trunk, Keegan said, stepping around her. There's water in the pitcher by the basin if you'd like to wash up. I'll bring in some more wood for the night. When he returned with her trunk, she had removed her hat and gloves but otherwise remained fully dressed. The firelight caught the golden highlights in her hair, and for a moment Keegan was struck by how out of place she looked in his rough cabin, like a porcelain figurine placed on a weathered fence post. I'll leave you to rest, he said, placing her trunk near the bed. I've got blankets in the barn, lock the door behind me. Mr. Calloway, she said as he turned to leave, thank you for your kindness. I won't impose on you longer than necessary. He nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. We'll figure something out tomorrow. Good night, Miss Gardner. Outside, as he heard the lock slide into place, Keegan wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd spent years keeping to himself, building walls that kept others at a safe distance. Now he'd brought a beautiful, vulnerable woman into his home, a woman with nowhere else to go and no one to rely on but him. As he settled into the hay in his barn, his horse nickering softly nearby, Keegan told himself this was temporary. He'd help her find a proper situation tomorrow, perhaps with the schoolteacher in town who sometimes took in boarders. Then he could return to his solitary life, where the only expectations were those he placed on himself, and the only person who could disappoint him was the man he saw in his shaving mirror each morning. But as sleep claimed him, Keegan couldn't shake the image of Delaney Gardner, golden hair shimmering in the firelight, standing in his cabin like a vision from another world, a world he'd convinced himself he had no interest in knowing. Morning came with the usual chorus of roosters and the soft nicker of horses demanding breakfast. Keegan rose before dawn, as was his habit, and set about his chores. He milked the cow, fed the horses, and collected eggs from the henhouse before approaching the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, telling him Delaney was already awake. He knocked gently. "Miss Gardner." "I've brought eggs and milk." The door opened, revealing Delaney in the same traveling dress, though she'd clearly attempted to refresh it. Her hair was neatly pinned back, and she'd washed her face. Despite the circumstances, she maintained a dignified bearing that spoke of her upbringing. "Good morning, Mr. Calloway," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he replied, placing the milk and eggs on the small table. He noticed she'd already stoked the fire and put the coffee pot on to boil. "You didn't need to do that." "I'm not helpless, Mr. Calloway, merely displaced," she said with a hint of steel in her voice. "I know how to make coffee." He couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. "Fair enough. I can fry up these eggs if you'd like breakfast." "That would be appreciated." She watched as he moved efficiently around his small kitchen area. "I need to make decisions today. Is there a solicitor in Cheyenne who might know about my uncle's affairs? I should find out if he left a will." Keegan cracked eggs into the cast iron pan. "Elias Thornton handles most legal matters around here. I can take you to see him after breakfast." "Thank you." Delaney poured coffee into the 2 tin cups on the table. "May I ask you something, Mr. Calloway?" "Of course. Why do you live alone out here?" "You seem young to be so." She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Isolated," he supplied. "I was going to say established," she corrected, "but yes, isolated too." Keegan focused on the eggs, not meeting her gaze. "I prefer it this way. The frontier's not kind to those who depend on others." "No one can truly survive alone," she said quietly. "I've managed for 7 years." "Existing isn't the same as living, Mr. Calloway." He slid the eggs onto 2 plates, adding a slice of bread he'd baked 2 days prior. "Maybe not in Boston. Out here, sometimes just existing takes all you've got." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Delaney spoke again. "I came west because I had nothing left in Boston. My parents died in a fire 2 years ago. I worked as a companion to an elderly lady until she passed last month." Uncle James' letter seemed providential. A sad smile crossed her face. "I suppose God has other plans for me." Keegan wasn't one for talk of providence or divine plans. In his experience, life happened, cruel and random, and a man either weathered it or broke beneath it. But something in her quiet resilience touched him. "We'll figure something out," he said again, surprised to find he meant it. In town, Mr. Thornton's news was both better and worse than expected. James Gardner had indeed left a will, naming his niece Delaney as his heir. The modest ranch and all its contents were legally hers. However, taxes were due, and the property had fallen into disrepair in the months since his death. "The cabin roof leaks and the corral fence is down in places," Thornton explained. "No stock left. James sold his cattle last year when his health began failing. There's about $50 in his account at the bank, but that won't go far if you're planning to work the land." Delaney sat very still, absorbing the information. "I see. And the property itself, is it valuable?" "Land is always valuable out here, Miss Gardner, but without someone to work it, it's just dirt and grass. Do you have any experience with ranching?" "I'm a quick learner, Mr. Thornton." The lawyer exchanged a glance with Keegan. "With all due respect, miss, ranching isn't something a woman alone can manage, especially one from the East. Most widows sell their husband's land because they have no choice." "I'm not a widow, Mr. Thornton. I'm an unmarried woman with no prospects and nowhere else to go." Delaney's voice was calm but firm. "This land is all I have. I intend to keep it." Outside the lawyer's office, Keegan walked beside Delaney in silence, noting the rigid set of her shoulders and the determined tilt of her chin. He should walk away now. Her problems weren't his concern. He had his own land to tend, his own struggles to manage. "The taxes are due in 3 weeks, she said finally, stopping in the middle of the boardwalk. "I need to see the property." Keegan sighed. "It's another 8 miles past my place. We should gather supplies if you're planning to stay there." "You'll take me there?" Hope flickered in her blue eyes. "I said I would help you." I keep my word. They spent the next hour gathering basic necessities: flour, coffee, salt, and other staples. Keegan added tools he suspected she'd need for repairs, ignoring her protests about the cost. "Consider it a loan," he said gruffly. "Pay me back when you can." By mid-afternoon, they were riding toward her uncle's property, her new supplies loaded on a packhorse Keegan had purchased with some of her inheritance. The April sun was warm on their backs, but Keegan knew spring storms could roll in quickly in Wyoming. He kept a wary eye on the horizon as they rode. The Gardner ranch came into view just before sunset, a small cabin similar to Keegan's, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, and open grassland that stretched toward distant hills. It wasn't much, but in the golden light of evening it held a certain promise. Delaney's sharp intake of breath told him she felt it too. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's rough country," Keegan warned. "Winters are harsh, summers are dry. It takes grit to make it here." She slid from the horse without waiting for his help. "Then it's fortunate I have plenty of that, Mr. Calloway." The cabin's interior was dusty but intact. Keegan helped her clear away cobwebs and light the stove while assessing what repairs would be most urgent. The roof needed patching before the next rain, and the barn door hung from one hinge. The well seemed sound, though, and the chimney drew properly. "You can't stay here alone tonight," he said as darkness fell. "It's not secure yet." "Are you proposing to sleep in my barn, Mr. Calloway?" There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "Unless you have a better suggestion. Tomorrow I'll help you with the most critical repairs, then you can decide what you want to do next." "Why are you helping me?" she asked, echoing her question from the train station. "You have your own ranch to run." Keegan hesitated. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," he said finally. "And because I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't become the kind of man who looks away when someone needs help." Delaney studied him in the lantern light. "I think there's more to you than you let people see, Keegan Calloway." He looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Over the next week, Keegan found himself riding to the Gardner property each morning after completing his own chores. Together they patched the roof, repaired the barn door, and mended the corral fence. Delaney worked alongside him, her hands quickly developing calluses, her fair skin tanning in the spring sunshine. She never complained, though he knew her muscles must ache from the unaccustomed labor. Instead, she approached each task with determination, watching carefully as he demonstrated, then attempting it herself. By the fourth day, she was handling a hammer competently, and by the sixth, she had learned to build a fire in the cookstove without smoking out the cabin. "You're a quick study," Keegan admitted as they sat on her porch, eating the stew she'd prepared. "Necessity is an excellent teacher." Delaney tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, a gesture he'd come to watch for. "But I know repairing buildings is only the beginning. I need livestock crops." "Start small," Keegan advised. "Chickens first, maybe a milk cow. You could plant a vegetable garden behind the cabin. The soil looks good there." "Build slowly." She nodded, considering. "I have $47 left. Is that enough?" Keegan calculated quickly. "For chickens, some seed and basic tools, yes. Not for a cow or horses yet." "Then I need to find a way to earn money." Determination set her jaw. "I can sew well. Perhaps there's a need for that in town." "Possibly," Keegan agreed, though he doubted it would bring in enough to build a working ranch. He should tell her that her plan was impossible, that a woman alone couldn't run a ranch, that she should sell the land and return east. It would be the practical advice. But watching her face in the fading light, her eyes fixed on the land that was now hers, he couldn't bring himself to crush her dream. Instead, he found himself saying, "I have 2 heifers I could spare. You could pay me when they calve." Her head turned sharply. "You would do that?" "It's a business arrangement," he said, trying to maintain some distance. "Nothing more." "Of course," she agreed quickly, "a business arrangement." But there was a warmth in her smile that made Keegan uneasy, a gratitude that seemed to reach past his carefully constructed barriers. He stood abruptly. "It's getting late. I should head back." "You could stay," she said, then rushed to clarify when he stiffened. "In the barn, I mean. It's nearly dark and you've ridden back and forth all week." He hesitated, torn between the practical sense of her suggestion and his need to maintain distance. "That wouldn't be proper." Proper seems a luxury out here, Mr. Calloway, she said wryly, but I understand. As he rode home in the gathering darkness, Keegan found himself thinking of Delaney more than he should. Her quiet strength, her quick mind, the way she approached each new challenge with determination rather than fear. She wasn't what he'd expected from an Eastern woman, and that was precisely the problem. He hadn't expected to admire her. He hadn't expected to look forward to seeing her each day. He certainly hadn't expected to find himself thinking of her golden hair in the sunlight when he should be concentrating on his work. Attachment was dangerous. His parents' deaths had taught him that lesson brutally. Care about someone and you give fate a hostage. Love someone and you hand your heart to them along with a knife to cut it out. No, he would help Delaney Gardner get established, fulfill his promise, and then withdraw to his own land and his own solitary life. It was safer that way, for both of them. The next morning, Keegan led two young heifers across to Delaney's property. She was already outside, attempting to turn soil for a garden. Her hair was tied back with a simple ribbon, and she'd adapted one of her uncle's old shirts to wear over her dress while working. The sight of her sleeves rolled up and dirt on her face stirred something unexpected in his chest. "Good morning," she called, setting down the shovel. Her eyes widened at the sight of the cattle. "Are those?" "Red Angus heifers," Keegan confirmed. "Good stock, they'll calve next spring if we get them bred this summer." "Thank you," she said, approaching to examine the animals. "They're beautiful." "They're an investment," he corrected, though he knew he was offering them at well below their value. "I'm not doing you any favors." "Of course not." There was that smile again, the one that suggested she saw through his gruffness. "Would you like coffee? I just made a fresh pot." They settled into a pattern over the next few weeks. Keegan would finish his morning chores, then ride over to help with the heaviest work at Delaney's ranch. They would work side by side, breaking only for a simple meal, often talking about the land or the animals, occasionally sharing small pieces of their pasts. He learned that she had been engaged once, to a banker's son who had broken the engagement when her parents died and her circumstances changed. She learned that he had worked as a cowhand on 3 different ranches before saving enough to buy his own small parcel of land. Neither of them spoke of deeper things, the loneliness, the fear, the doubts that plagued them in the quiet hours. But Keegan found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noting the grace with which she moved, the gentle way she handled the animals, the determination in her eyes when she faced a new challenge. It was dangerous, this growing awareness. He knew he should pull back, limit his time at her ranch, protect himself from the vulnerability of caring. But each morning he found himself saddling his horse and riding the familiar path to her land, telling himself it was just neighborly duty, nothing more. Until the day the storm came. He'd been helping her repair a section of fence when he noticed dark clouds building on the western horizon. "That's going to be a bad one," he said, straightening. "We should get the animals secured." Delaney followed his gaze, her face growing serious. "How much time do we have?" "An hour, maybe less. Let's move." They worked quickly, moving the heifers into the barn, securing loose items around the property, bringing in extra firewood and water. Keegan could feel the pressure dropping as the storm approached, the wind beginning to pick up, carrying the scent of rain. "You should head back," Delaney said as they finished, watching the approaching wall of clouds. "Your own animals will need tending." Keegan glanced at the storm, calculating. "No time, that's moving too fast." He turned to her. "I've weathered worse. I'll stay in your barn tonight if that's acceptable." Relief flashed across her face. "Of course, but there's no need for you to stay in the barn. The cabin has room enough." Before he could argue, the first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy. Within moments, it had become a downpour. They ran for the cabin, reaching the porch just as lightning split the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Inside, Delaney quickly stoked the fire while Keegan shed his dripping coat. The small cabin suddenly felt even smaller with both of them inside, the air charged with an awareness that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. "You're soaked through," she said, bringing him a towel. "I can make coffee to warm you up." "Thank you," he said, suddenly formal, acutely conscious of their isolation and proximity. The storm raged through the evening, wind howling around the cabin, rain lashing at the windows. They ate a simple supper of beans and cornbread, sitting at the small table, the lantern casting warm light over their faces. Outside, the world was chaos, but inside the cabin, a strange peace had settled. "I've been meaning to ask," Delaney said as she poured more coffee. "Why ranching? What drew you to this life?" Keegan considered the question. "Freedom, I suppose. Out here a man stands or falls on his own merits. No one to answer to but yourself and the land. And no one to rely on but yourself," she added quietly. "Is that so bad?" "It's lonely," she said simply. "Humans aren't meant to live in isolation, Keegan. We need connection." "Connection is a luxury some can't afford," he said, more sharply than he intended. "Why, what happened to make you believe that?" Her eyes held his, refusing to let him look away. The wind rattled the windows and rain drummed on the roof, but the silence between them seemed louder. Finally, Keegan spoke. "I was 16 when raiders hit our homestead. My father tried to fight them off. They killed him first, then my mother when she screamed." The words came out flat, emotionless, a story he'd never told anyone. "I was out checking fence lines, came back to find them both dead, our cabin burned." Delaney's hand covered his on the table. "I'm so sorry. I learned then that loving someone is just giving life a target. The more you care, the more it hurts when they're gone." He withdrew his hand. "It's simpler to stand alone." "Simpler, yes," she agreed softly. "But is it better?" Before he could answer, a tremendous crash sounded outside. Keegan was on his feet instantly, grabbing his coat. "Stay here," he ordered, heading for the door. Outside, the rain was coming down in sheets, but by the light of a lightning flash, he could see that a large tree had fallen, partially crushing the corner of the barn. He ran toward it, Delaney right behind him despite his instructions. "The animals," she cried over the wind. Inside the barn, the heifers were panicking, pushing against their stalls. One section of roof had collapsed, letting in rain and wind. Together, they managed to calm the cattle and move them to the secure part of the structure. Keegan quickly assessed the damage. "It's not as bad as it looks," he shouted over the storm. "The main supports are still solid. We can repair it once the weather clears." They made their way back to the cabin, both drenched to the skin. Inside, Delaney immediately stoked the fire higher, then turned to Keegan with concern. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death," she said practically. "I can turn my back while you change. I have one of my uncle's nightshirts that might fit you." Keegan knew she was right, but the thought of undressing in her presence, even with her back turned, made him uncomfortable. Yet the alternative was risking illness, which he couldn't afford. "All right," he agreed reluctantly. She handed him a folded nightshirt and turned to face the wall, busying herself with hanging her own wet shawl near the fire. Keegan changed quickly, the borrowed nightshirt fitting loosely across his shoulders. "I'm decent," he said when he'd finished. Delaney turned, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of him in the nightshirt. His usual rugged appearance softened. "You should sit by the fire to warm up. I'll make more coffee." As she moved around the small cabin, Keegan noticed she was shivering, her own dress still damp. "You need to change too," he said. "I'll step outside." "In this storm?" "Don't be ridiculous." She reached for a screen he hadn't noticed before, unfolding it to create a small private area near the bed. "This will suffice." She disappeared behind the screen, and Keegan fixed his gaze firmly on the fire, trying not to think about her changing just a few feet away. When she emerged, she wore a simple nightgown with a heavy shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her golden hair hung in a damp braid over one shoulder. "Better," she said, moving to the fire. "Though I think this storm plans to rage all night." They sat side by side before the hearth, mugs of hot coffee warming their hands, listening to the wind and rain battering the small cabin. There was something intimate about the moment, both of them in night clothes, the storm isolating them from the rest of the world, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Thank you," Delaney said suddenly, "for staying, for helping with the barn. For everything these past weeks." "It's what neighbors do," Keegan said, though he knew his assistance had gone beyond mere neighborly duty. "Is that what we are, just neighbors?" Her voice was soft, but her question hung in the air between them, impossible to ignore. Keegan turned to look at her, finding her blue eyes searching his face. In the firelight, with her hair loose and her defenses down, she was more beautiful than ever, and more dangerous to his carefully constructed solitude. "What else would we be?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I feel," she hesitated, "when you're here I feel less alone, less afraid. As if maybe I can actually make this work." You can make it work, he said firmly. You're stronger than you know, Delaney. Because you've helped me believe in myself. Her hand found his again, her touch sending warmth up his arm that had nothing to do with the fire. You say connection is dangerous, Keegan, but what if isolation is the greater risk? What if in protecting ourselves from pain, we're also shutting out joy? Her words struck at the heart of the belief he'd lived by for years. He wanted to withdraw his hand, to rebuild the walls she was so effortlessly breaching, but he found himself frozen, caught between fear and longing. I've watched you these past weeks, she continued when he didn't speak. You say you prefer to be alone, yet you ride over every day. You claim to want distance, yet you've taught me everything I know about ranching. Your actions speak louder than your words, Keegan Calloway. I don't know what you want from me, he said finally, though part of him feared he did know, and feared he wanted it too. I want you to stop pretending that you're meant to be alone, she said simply. I want you to admit that maybe, just maybe, there's room in your life for something more than survival. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that threatened everything Keegan had believed about himself and his life. It's not that simple, he said finally. It never is, she agreed, but nothing worthwhile ever comes easy, especially out here. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. Think about it, that's all I'm asking. She rose gracefully, moving to the bed. You can take the cot by the fire. It's not much, but it's better than the floor. Keegan watched as she slipped beneath the covers, turning her back to give him privacy. He settled onto the narrow cot, listening to the storm and to her quiet breathing across the room. Sleep eluded him. Delaney's words echoed in his mind, challenging the foundation of everything he'd built his life upon. Was she right? Had he confused isolation with independence, mistaken loneliness for strength? The thought was unsettling, threatening to unravel years of careful distance. Yet as he lay in the darkness, listening to the rain on the roof and the soft sound of Delaney's breathing, Keegan couldn't deny the sense of rightness he felt in this moment, not despite her presence, but because of it. Morning brought clear skies and the fresh, clean scent of washed earth. Keegan rose early, dressing quickly while Delaney still slept. Outside, he assessed the damage to the barn. The fallen tree had damaged one corner, but the repair would be straightforward with the right tools and lumber. He was measuring the damaged section when he heard the cabin door open. Delaney emerged, once again dressed in her practical work clothes, her hair neatly braided. She approached with a mug of coffee, which she handed to him wordlessly. Thank you, he said, accepting the warm drink. The damage isn't as bad as it seemed last night. I can ride into town for lumber, be back by midday to start repairs. I appreciate that, she studied the barn thoughtfully. I was thinking about what you said last night, about standing or falling on your own merits out here. What about it? I think you're half right. We do stand or fall based on our own strength and decisions. But I also think we stand taller when we're not alone. She met his eyes directly. I'm not asking you to change who you are, Keegan, just to consider that maybe there's room in your life for more than solitude. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders appeared on the trail, and Keegan instinctively moved to stand between them and Delaney, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. As the riders drew closer, he recognized the man in the lead, Thomas Barrett, a wealthy rancher whose property bordered the western edge of what was now Delaney's land. Morning, Calloway, Barrett called as they approached, saw the downed tree from the ridge, came to check if help was needed. His eyes moved to Delaney, assessing her with interest. I don't believe I've had the pleasure, miss. Delaney Gardner, she said, stepping forward. James Gardner was my uncle. I've inherited his property. Barrett dismounted, removing his hat. My condolences on your uncle's passing. He was a good neighbor, he extended his hand. Thomas Barrett, my ranch is just over that rise to the west. Keegan watched the exchange with unease. Barrett was in his 40s, a widower with a reputation for fair dealing but also ruthless expansion of his holdings. He tried to buy James Gardner's land multiple times before the old man's death. Miss Gardner is getting the place back in order, Keegan said, perhaps more sharply than necessary. The storm did some damage, but nothing we can't handle. Barrett raised an eyebrow at Keegan's use of we, but addressed his response to Delaney. Ranching's hard work, Miss Gardner, especially for a woman alone. If you're considering selling, I'd be interested in making you a fair offer. Save you the trouble of trying to work this land yourself. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Barrett, Delaney said politely, but I have no intention of selling. This land is my home now. Barrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, just thought I'd offer still if you change your mind. He glanced between Delaney and Keegan. Or if you find the challenges too great, my offer stands. He settled his hat back on his head. We'll be on our way. Good day, Miss Gardner, Calloway. As the men rode off, Keegan's unease deepened. Barrett's been trying to buy this land for years. Your uncle always refused him. And so will I, Delaney said firmly, though I suspect he'll be back. Likely, Keegan agreed. Barrett doesn't give up easily when he wants something. Neither do I, determination flashed in her eyes. Now about that lumber for the barn. The arrival of Barrett changed something between them. Neither mentioned their conversation from the night before, instead focusing on the practical task of repairing the storm damage. But Keegan found himself watching Delaney more closely, noting the determined set of her jaw when she spoke of keeping her land, the gentle way she tended to the animals, the quick intelligence with which she absorbed everything he taught her. And he found himself wondering, for the first time in years, what it might be like to let someone past his carefully constructed defenses. The next few weeks brought new challenges. Barrett returned twice more, each time with a higher offer for Delaney's land. She refused politely but firmly, though Keegan could see the offers tempted her, not out of desire to leave, but from practical recognition of how difficult her path would be. $15,000 would set you up comfortably anywhere, Keegan said after Barrett's third visit. You could go back east, buy a small house, live without this constant struggle. They were sitting on her porch in the evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple. Delaney's heifers grazed peacefully in the nearby pasture, and the newly repaired barn stood solid against the twilight sky. Is that what you think I should do? She asked, watching him carefully. Sell out and leave. Keegan hesitated. The sensible answer was yes. She was a woman alone, facing years of hard work with no guarantee of success. Barrett's offer was generous, far more than the land was objectively worth. Yet the thought of Delaney leaving, of these evenings on the porch ending, of returning to his solitary existence without her quiet strength and challenging questions, left an emptiness in his chest he couldn't ignore. No, he said finally, I think you should stay and fight for what's yours if that's what you want. She smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. It is what I want, though I won't pretend it doesn't frighten me sometimes, the enormity of what I'm attempting. Fear isn't weakness, Keegan said. It's just your mind acknowledging the stakes. The courage comes in moving forward anyway. Is that what you do, move forward despite the fear? I've spent years avoiding things I fear, he admitted. It seemed safer that way. And now, he met her eyes in the fading light. Now I'm not so sure. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Delaney stood, breaking the tension. It's getting late. You should probably head back before dark. Keegan nodded, rising to his feet. I'll return tomorrow. We should start on the north fence line. Actually, Delaney said, I was thinking I might ride into town tomorrow. There are supplies I need and... She hesitated. Barrett mentioned the town social is tomorrow night. I thought I might go, meet some of the other neighbors. Something sharp and unpleasant twisted in Keegan's chest at the thought of Delaney at the social, perhaps dancing with Barrett or one of the other eligible men in the county. Of course, he said stiffly, that's sensible. Would you, she paused, then continued with determined casualness, would you consider accompanying me as my escort? The request caught him off guard. I don't attend socials, he said automatically, never have. Never, surprise colored her voice. Why not? Because they represented everything he'd avoided, connection, community, the messy entanglement of human relationships. Because watching from the outside was safer than participating, because once you joined in, people expected you to keep coming back. They're not to my taste, he said instead. I see, disappointment flickered across her face before she masked it with a smile. Well, perhaps Mrs. Wilson might accompany me. She mentioned she enjoys the dancing. Mrs. Wilson is visiting her daughter in Laramie. The The words came out before Keegan could stop them. He sighed, recognizing defeat. "What time would you like to leave for town?" Her smile was like sunrise. "Really? You'll come. As your escort only," he clarified quickly. "Don't expect me to dance." "Of course not," she agreed, though her eyes sparkled with something that made him suspect she had other plans. "Thank you, Keegan." As he rode home in the gathering darkness, Keegan wondered what he was getting himself into. A social meant people, conversation, expectations he wasn't sure he could meet. Yet the memory of Delaney's smile made the discomfort seem a small price to pay. The following evening found Keegan waiting nervously on Delaney's porch, dressed in his one good shirt and the suit jacket he wore only for funerals and bank meetings. He'd trimmed his beard and attempted to tame his hair, feeling awkward and out of place even before they reached town. When Delaney emerged from the cabin, however, all thoughts of discomfort vanished. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her golden hair arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. A small pendant, her mother's, she'd once mentioned, rested at her throat. "You look," Keegan swallowed, searching for words adequate to the vision before him. "Very nice," he finished lamely. "Thank you," a blush colored her cheeks. "You clean up quite well yourself, Mr. Calloway." The ride to town passed quickly, with Delaney chatting about the improvements she planned for her garden and the chicken coop Keegan had helped her build the previous week. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Keegan found himself offering suggestions, drawn into her vision of what the ranch could become. The social was held in the town hall, a sturdy wooden building decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers. Inside, nearly everyone from the surrounding area had gathered. Music from a small band filled the air, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Keegan felt eyes turn toward them as they entered, Delaney on his arm, looking like spring personified in her blue dress. He recognized the surprise on many faces. Keegan Calloway, the solitary rancher who barely spoke 3 words at cattle auctions, escorting the beautiful newcomer who'd inherited old Gardner's place. "Miss Gardner," Thomas Barrett approached, looking distinguished in his formal attire. "I'm delighted you decided to join us." His gaze flickered to Keegan. "Calloway, surprised to see you here." "Mr. Barrett," Delaney greeted him politely. "Yes, Mr. Calloway was kind enough to escort me. I'm looking forward to meeting more of my neighbors." "Allow me to introduce you around," Barrett offered, extending his arm. Delaney hesitated, glancing at Keegan. "Perhaps later, I believe Mr. Calloway was about to get me some punch." Keegan, who had been considering a strategic retreat to the least populated corner of the room, found himself nodding. "Of course. If you'll excuse us, Barrett." As they moved toward the refreshment table, Delaney leaned close. "Thank you. I know this isn't your idea of an enjoyable evening." "It's fine," Keegan said, surprised to find he meant it. With Delaney beside him, the crowded room seemed less intimidating. "Though I should warn you, people will talk about you being here with me." "Let them talk," she said simply. "I've never put much stock in gossip." Throughout the evening, Delaney was introduced to dozens of townspeople and neighboring ranchers. To Keegan's surprise, she frequently drew him into these conversations, subtly including him rather than allowing him to fade into the background as he would have preferred. When the dancing began, Barrett was quick to claim Delaney for the first set. Keegan watched from the sidelines, telling himself the twist in his gut wasn't jealousy, merely concern for his neighbor and friend. "Never thought I'd see the day," a voice said beside him. Keegan turned to find Sheriff Mills, a grizzled man who'd known Keegan since his arrival in the territory. Keegan Calloway at a social, looking like he might actually be enjoying himself. "I'm just escorting Miss Gardner," Keegan said stiffly. "Being neighborly." "MMHMM," the sheriff's knowing look suggested he didn't believe that for a moment. "She's a fine woman, stubborn as they come from what I hear, turned down Barrett's offers flat. She wants to make a go of the ranch." "So I heard," Mills studied him thoughtfully. "You've been helping her quite a bit, folks say." Keegan shrugged. "She's new to ranching." "It's the decent thing to do." "Is that all it is, decency?" The sheriff's eyes were kind but penetrating, because from where I'm standing it looks like something more. Before Keegan could respond, the music ended, and Delaney returned to his side, her cheeks flushed from dancing. "Sheriff Mills," she greeted him warmly, "I hope you're enjoying the evening." Always do, Miss Gardner. These socials bring folks together, remind us we're a community, not just scattered homesteads. He tipped his hat. I'll leave you two young folks to enjoy the rest of the night. As he walked away, Delaney turned to Keegan. He seems nice. He is, Keegan agreed. One of the few men out here I genuinely respect. The band struck up a slower tune, and Delaney's eyes brightened. I love this song, my father used to sing it. Keegan found himself speaking before he could think better of it. Would you like to dance? Surprise and pleasure bloomed on her face. I thought you didn't dance. I said don't expect me to, he corrected with a small smile. Not that I wouldn't. Taking her hand, he led her to the dance floor. It had been years since he'd danced, not since before his parents died, but his body remembered the steps. Delaney fit perfectly in his arms, her hands small and warm in his, her blue eyes looking up at him with an expression that made his heart beat faster. You're full of surprises, Keegan Calloway, she said softly as they moved together. Is that good or bad? Good, she assured him, definitely good. As they danced, Keegan became aware of the curious glances directed their way, the whispered conversations behind hands. But for once, he found he didn't care what others thought. In this moment, with Delaney in his arms, the music surrounding them, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Belonging meant connection. Connection meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant risk. Yet as Delaney smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the soft lantern light, Keegan couldn't bring himself to regret the risk he was taking. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that there might be something worth risking his heart for. The spell was broken when Barrett appeared at the end of the dance, claiming Delaney's attention. Miss Gardner, I hope you'll save the next dance for me. Before she could respond, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A young cowhand from one of the outlying ranches burst in, his face pale with urgency. Fire, he shouted. There's a fire out near Gardner's place, wind's whipping it up something fierce. Keegan's blood ran cold. He grabbed Delaney's arm. We need to go now. They raced outside to find an ominous orange glow lighting the northern sky. Keegan helped Delaney onto her horse, then swung up onto his own. Barrett appeared beside them, already mounted. I've got men who can help, he said. We'll follow you. The ride back to Delaney's ranch was a nightmare of fear and growing dread. As they crested the final rise, they could see flames consuming the dry grass of the eastern pasture, driven by the wind toward the cabin and barn. No, Delaney whispered, her face white in the firelight. Keegan's mind raced, assessing options. The creek, he said suddenly. If we can get to the creek, we can try to create a fire break. Barrett, send your men to the north side with shovels. We'll try to direct the fire away from the buildings. The next hours passed in a blur of smoke, heat, and desperate effort. Men worked with shovels and wet blankets, trying to control the fire's path. Keegan lost track of time, focused only on the next shovelful of dirt, the next section of fire break, the desperate need to save what Delaney had worked so hard to build. Dawn was breaking when they finally contained the last of the flames. The eastern pasture was a blackened wasteland, but they'd managed to save the cabin, barn, and western grazing land. Exhausted, covered in soot and ash, Keegan found Delaney sitting on the porch steps, staring at the charred remains of what had been lush grass just hours before. You're hurt, she said as he approached, noticing the burn on his forearm. It's nothing. He sat beside her, too tired to remain standing. The important thing is we saved the buildings and most of the grazing land. What caused it? Her voice was hollow with shock and exhaustion. Lightning strike most likely. That dead pine on the ridge would have caught easily. He hesitated, then added what they both knew, or it could have been set. She turned to him, eyes wide. You think someone would deliberately? It happens. Someone wants land badly enough, they might try to scare the owner into selling. Keegan didn't say Barrett's name, but it hung in the air between them. I won't sell, Delaney said, her voice finding strength. If that was the intention, it failed. Keegan studied her face, smudged with ash but set with determination. No one would blame you if you did. This is just the beginning of the challenges you'll face. Are you suggesting I should give up? A spark of anger flared in her eyes. After everything you've taught me, everything we've built. No, he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. I'm saying it would be understandable, but I don't think you should. This land is yours. You've earned it with sweat and determination. He gestured to the charred pasture. This is a setback, not an ending. She looked at him for a long moment, then leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. Thank you for being here, for fighting alongside me. Keegan hesitated only briefly before putting his arm around her. Always, he promised, and was startled to realize he meant it. They sat in silence as the sun rose fully, illuminating the damage but also the land that remained, land that could recover, grow green again, support life and dreams. Just as people could, Keegan thought, if given the chance. In the days that followed the fire, the true character of the community revealed itself. Neighbors Keegan barely knew arrived with fence posts and wire to help repair the burned sections. Women from town brought food and offered help with household tasks while Delaney focused on recovery efforts. Even Sheriff Mills rode out to investigate the fire's origin, though he found nothing conclusive to suggest arson. Barrett notably did not return with further offers to buy the land. Keegan found himself at Delaney's ranch from sunrise to sunset, working alongside the volunteers, directing efforts, and ensuring that when everyone else left, Delaney wasn't alone with the overwhelming task of rebuilding. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the fire, they sat on her porch watching the sunset. The burned pasture was already showing signs of new growth, small green shoots pushing through the blackened earth. Life finds a way, Delaney said, nodding toward the new growth, even after destruction. It does, Keegan agreed, thinking not just of the land but of himself. The walls he'd built around his heart slowly crumbling in the face of Delaney's quiet strength and unwavering determination. I've been thinking, she said after a moment, about what you said the night of the fire about this being my land, earned with sweat and determination. It's true. Yes, but it's not complete. She turned to face him fully. This isn't just my accomplishment, it's ours. Everything I've learned, everything I've built, you've been beside me every step. I couldn't have done this alone. You're stronger than you know, Keegan said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. You would have found a way. Perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to. She reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. Which brings me to what I've been wanting to ask you. Keegan felt a flutter of apprehension. What's that? Our ranches are adjacent. We're both working alone, stretching ourselves thin trying to manage everything. It would make practical sense to combine our efforts. Her eyes held his steadily. I'm proposing a partnership, Keegan. Your land and mine work together. Shared resources, shared labor, shared, she hesitated, shared future. He stared at her, understanding dawning. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking you to consider that we might be stronger together than apart. A blush colored her cheeks, but her gaze remained direct. In every sense. Keegan's heart pounded in his chest. The practical part of him recognized the sense in what she proposed. Their ranches side by side, their efforts combined, would indeed be more efficient, more likely to succeed in this unforgiving country. But the deeper implication of her words, the suggestion of a shared life, not just shared work, that struck at the very foundation of the walls he'd built around his heart. Walls that had been crumbling steadily since the day he found her sleeping at the train station. Delaney, he began, not sure what he wanted to say. You don't need to answer now, she said quickly. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Sheriff Mills appeared, accompanied by 2 deputies and, surprisingly, Thomas Barrett. Evening, Miss Gardner, Calloway, Mills called as they dismounted. Hope we're not interrupting. Keegan rose, instinctively moving to stand slightly in front of Delaney. Sheriff, what brings you out here? Mills's expression was grim. Business, I'm afraid. Mr. Barrett has brought some concerning information to my attention. He turned to Barrett. Would you like to explain? Barrett stepped forward, his face a mask of regret that didn't reach his eyes. I've recently discovered that the deed to this property may not be as straightforward as we believed. There appears to be some question about James Gardner's ownership. What? Delaney stood, shocked. That's impossible. My uncle owned this land for 15 years. According to documents I've uncovered, Barrett continued smoothly, Gardner never properly filed his claim. The land technically still belongs to the original homesteader, whose heir has now surfaced and assigned their rights to me. Keegan's fists clenched. That's convenient timing, Barrett. These documents surface only after Miss Gardner refuses your offers to buy. I understand your skepticism, Barrett said with false sympathy, but the law is clear. Until this matter is resolved, Miss Gardner cannot legally claim ownership. Sheriff Mills looked uncomfortable but determined. I'm sorry, Miss Gardner, but Mr. Barrett has filed the proper papers with the territorial court. There will be a hearing next month to determine rightful ownership. Until then, he hesitated. The court has ordered that you cease making improvements or changes to the property. You're saying I can't work my own land? Delaney's voice was steady, but Keegan could see the fear in her eyes. You can continue to live here, Mills clarified, but no new building, fencing, or other permanent changes until ownership is established. Keegan stepped forward. This is outrageous, Sheriff. It's a transparent attempt to force Miss Gardner off her land. I'm just doing my job, Keegan, Mills said quietly. The court will sort it out. After the sheriff and his party left, Delaney sat heavily on the porch steps. This can't be happening, she whispered. Everything I've worked for. Keegan knelt before her, taking her hands in his. Listen to me. Barrett is playing a game, trying to wear you down, but we're not going to let him win. We'll fight this in court. I'll help you find a lawyer in Cheyenne, someone who knows territorial law. With what money? She asked bitterly. What little I had has gone into rebuilding after the fire. I can't afford a lawyer. I have savings, Keegan said without hesitation. We'll use that. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. He squeezed her hands. Partners, remember. Your fight is my fight now. She looked at him for a long moment, then did something that took his breath away. Leaning forward, she pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss that lasted only seconds but changed everything. Thank you, she whispered as she pulled back, her eyes shining with unshed tears and something else, determination, hope, and perhaps something deeper. In that moment, Keegan knew he was lost. All his careful walls, his determined isolation, his protection against pain, none of it mattered anymore. This woman, with her courage and her dreams, had claimed a place in his heart that could never be relinquished. We'll fight, he promised, his voice rough with emotion, and we'll win. The next weeks were a blur of activity. Keegan helped Delaney find a lawyer in Cheyenne, a shrewd, experienced man named Hobson who specialized in land disputes. They rode into town repeatedly, searching county records, gathering testimonials from neighbors who had known James Gardner and the boundaries of his property. All while continuing to maintain both ranches, care for the animals, and prepare for the coming winter. Through it all, Keegan found himself drawn ever deeper into Delaney's life and heart. The kiss on the porch had changed something between them, removing the final barrier of pretense. They still didn't speak directly of feelings, but there was an understanding now, an acknowledgement of what was growing between them. The evening before the court hearing, they sat by the fire in Delaney's cabin, reviewing their case one last time. Mr. Hobson seems confident, Delaney said, though worry lined her face. The testimonials from Sheriff Mills and Pastor Williams about Uncle James' long residence here are compelling. Barrett's claim is built on forgery and lies, Keegan agreed. But he has money and influence with the territorial judge. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Remember that. She smiled, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. I never thought I'd be grateful for finding myself stranded at a train station, but I am. If you hadn't been there that night. I was thinking about that recently, Keegan admitted. How close I came to riding past, to minding my own business as I always had before. What made you stop? He considered the question. Something in your face, even in sleep, a determination that matched something in me, I think. And then when you woke, he smiled at the memory. You weren't afraid, not really. Cautious, yes, but not fearful. I admired that immediately. I was terrified, she confessed with a small laugh. But my mother always said, never let them see your fear, Delaney. Stand tall and speak clearly, and the world will make way for you. Wise woman. She would have liked you. Delaney's eyes grew distant with memory. She always said I needed someone as stubborn as myself. Is that what I am, stubborn? Among other things, her smile turned mischievous. Stubborn, loyal, principled, kind beneath that gruff exterior. You make me sound like a good man. You are a good man, Keegan Calloway, her voice softened. The best I've known. The sincerity in her eyes humbled him. For so long, he'd defined himself by his isolation, his independence. He'd seen connection as weakness, vulnerability as danger. Now, looking at Delaney in the firelight, he wondered how he could have been so wrong. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said slowly, choosing his words with care, I want you to know that meeting you has changed me, changed how I see the world, how I see myself. He took a deep breath. For years, I believed the frontier was no place for love, that caring for someone was just giving life a target. But you've shown me that real strength isn't in standing alone, it's in finding someone worth standing beside. Tears gathered in Delaney's eyes. Keegan, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not good with words and this needs saying. He took both her hands in his. If we lose tomorrow, if Barrett takes this land, I want you to know that my offer stands. My land, my home, everything I have, it's yours to share, not just as partners in work but in life. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Keegan Calloway, are you proposing to me? Apparently I'm doing a poor job of it if you have to ask, he said with a self-deprecating smile. But yes, I am. I love you, Delaney Gardner. I want to build a life with you, on whichever piece of land we can call our own. She launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him off his chair. Yes, she whispered against his neck. Yes, I'll marry you, land or no land, I choose you, Keegan. He held her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms, how right it felt to have her heart beating against his. For the first time since his parents' deaths, Keegan felt truly at home, not in a place but in a person. We should probably win the case anyway, he murmured into her hair. Since we've put so much work into this place. Her laughter, bright and clear, filled the cabin. We will, and then we'll build something wonderful here together. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was packed the next morning. Word of the dispute had spread, and many local ranchers and townspeople had come to watch. Barrett sat at one table with his lawyer, a slick-looking man from Denver. Delaney and Keegan sat at the other with Mr. Hobson, who arranged his papers with methodical precision. The judge, a stern-faced man named Crawford, called the court to order. Barrett's case went first, a complex tale of paperwork never filed, a distant relative of the original homesteader suddenly appearing with a claim that had been immediately sold to Barrett for a suspiciously small sum. When it was their turn, Hobson presented the testimonials, tax records showing James Gardner's payments over 15 years, and most damaging of all, evidence that the original homesteader Barrett claimed had owned the land had, in fact, died childless in 1863. Your Honor, Hobson concluded, Mr. Barrett's claim rests entirely on fraudulent documents and a non-existent heir. This is nothing more than an attempt to pressure Miss Gardner into selling land that is rightfully hers. Judge Crawford's expression gave nothing away, as he called a brief recess to consider his ruling. Keegan and Delaney waited in tense silence, hands clasped beneath the table. When the judge returned, he wasted no time. Having reviewed the evidence, I find the claim of Thomas Barrett to be without merit. The land in question legally belongs to Delaney Gardner as the rightful heir of James Gardner. Furthermore, he added, his stern gaze fixing on Barrett, I am referring this matter to the federal marshal for investigation into potential fraud. This court is adjourned. The room erupted in conversation as Barrett stormed out, his lawyer hurrying behind him. Delaney sat in stunned silence for a moment before turning to Keegan, joy lighting her face. We won, she whispered. We actually won. I never doubted it, Keegan said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Your uncle's land is yours, free and clear. Outside the courthouse, they were surprised to find several neighbors waiting to congratulate them. Sheriff Mills shook Keegan's hand firmly. Glad to see justice done, he said. Barrett's had his eye on that land for too long, suspected he might try something like this. Thank you for your testimony, Sheriff, Delaney said warmly. It made a difference. As the well-wishers dispersed, Keegan and Delaney stood alone on the courthouse steps, the autumn sun warm on their faces. So, Miss Gardner, Keegan said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Now that you're a confirmed landowner, what are your plans? Well, Mr. Calloway, she replied with matching playfulness. I believe I accepted a proposal last night. Something about joining our lands and our lives. I recall something of the sort. Then my plans involve a wedding, followed by building the finest ranch in the territory with my husband by my side. She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. Does that align with your thinking? In answer, Keegan drew her into his arms, no longer caring who might see. Perfectly, he murmured before kissing her, there on the courthouse steps in full view of anyone passing by. 2 months later, on a clear December day, Keegan Calloway and Delaney Gardner were married in the small church in Cheyenne. Pastor Williams officiated, and to Keegan's surprise, nearly everyone from the surrounding ranches attended. Even Sheriff Mills cleaned up well in his Sunday best. Delaney wore a simple white dress with her mother's pendant at her throat and wildflowers in her golden hair. Keegan, watching her walk toward him down the short aisle, thought she had never looked more beautiful, and that he had never felt more certain of anything in his life. Their vows were straightforward, spoken from the heart. Promises to stand together against whatever hardships the frontier might bring, to build something lasting on the land they both loved, to face each day as partners in all things. As Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Keegan looked into Delaney's eyes and saw his future reflected there. Not one of isolation and self-reliance, but of shared joy, shared burdens, and the kind of love that made even the harshest frontier feel like home. The following spring found them on the porch of the newly expanded cabin that straddled the property line between their two ranches, watching as new calves frolicked in the pasture. The burned land had recovered completely, lush with green grass. Their merged herds grazed contentedly, almost doubled in size from careful breeding and trading. I was thinking, Delaney said, her head resting against Keegan's shoulder, we should add another room to the cabin. Oh, Keegan raised an eyebrow. Planning to take in boarders. She smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. No, but in about 7 months we're going to need more space. Keegan froze, his mind struggling to comprehend her meaning. Then understanding dawned, and with it a joy so profound it nearly took his breath away. A baby, he whispered, awed. We're having a baby. Delaney nodded, tears of happiness shimmering in her eyes. A little cowboy or cowgirl of our own. What do you think? Keegan gathered her in his arms, his heart so full it felt it might burst. I think, he said, his voice rough with emotion, that I am the most fortunate man in Wyoming Territory. Maybe in the entire West. As he held his wife close, watching the sun set over their joined lands, Keegan thought about the night at the train station almost a year ago. How close he had come to riding past, to missing this chance at happiness. How much his life had changed because he had stopped, because he had whispered, "Come home with me," to a sleeping stranger. The frontier was still harsh, still demanding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles. But Keegan knew now what he hadn't known then, that love wasn't a weakness to be avoided, but a strength to be embraced. That a heart shared was stronger than a heart guarded. That home wasn't a place but a person who saw your broken edges and loved you anyway. I love you, Delaney Calloway, he murmured against her hair. And I love you, she replied, her voice full of promise. Now and always. Together they watched darkness fall over their land, secure in the knowledge that whatever the frontier might bring, they would face it as they had faced everything since that fateful night at the train station. Side by side, hearts intertwined, building a love strong enough to tame the wild Wyoming sky.